Step aboard the Royal Yacht Britannia and uncover the secrets of Queen Elizabeth II's floating home and the only royal residence she and Prince Philip helped to design. In this behind-the-scenes tour from History Calling, I show you footage and photographs taken during my recent visit which showcase the interior world of Britain's most iconic royal ship, where history, luxury and diplomacy sailed side by side. From the beautiful state apartments to the private royal bedrooms and studies and the slightly less comfortable crew quarters, don't miss the chance to discover the story behind this iconic ship and what life was truly like aboard the yacht that carried the Queen and her family across the globe for over 40 years. You'll even hear which honeymooning couple had the ship's only double bed brought aboard for their use. Discussions for a new royal yacht to replace the ageing and increasingly fragile ship, the Victoria and Albert, dated back to the short reign of Edward VIII in 1936, but it was only at the start of the reign of Elizabeth II that the plans were finally put into motion. The Queen and her husband, the Duke of Edinburgh, later created Prince Philip, were able to have a strong say in the design, making Britannia the only royal home they really had an input into during her reign, as all the other royal residences were already built and no others would be constructed for the monarch. The keel of what was then known as ship number 691 was laid in Clydebank, Scotland on the 11th of June 1952, and the interiors were designed by Patrick McBride and Sir Hugh Casson, after McBride's initial plans were deemed too ostentatious. Contrary to the 17th century French inspiration he had used as a template, Elizabeth and Philip didn't want a floating palace. They wanted something simpler and more informal than what their other homes offered. The result would be a ship with a comfortable country house feel to it, at least in the apartments used by the royals. As for the exterior, the paint scheme was to be navy and red with gold trim. On the 16th of April 1953, she was ready to go into the water, and the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh attended as the ship was both launched and formally named Britannia by Her Majesty. This name had been chosen by the royal couple and demonstrated the ship's links to its homeland, as that was the name given to the land by the Romans, and to the female personification of Great Britain, which you'll often see in images and statues or hear referenced in poetry. It's a bit like Uncle Sam in America. It had also been used before for ships including those of the Royal Navy, and for a cutter built for the future Edward VII and used by his son George V. And of course, I'm sure you've all heard of the very famous song, Rule Britannia. The new royal yacht was, and still is, 412 feet and 3 inches long, which is not huge, but nevertheless a very respectable size. With the shell built, now the work of outfitting the ship, including its interiors, could begin in earnest. The hollow masts were put in place, each with a few coins beneath them, as was tradition, and the funnel was added. Britannia would have some other interesting design and running details too. The windows of the royal apartments are set slightly higher than on a normal ship to afford the family more privacy, and the ship was to be run with as little noise as possible, with orders on deck communicated via signals made with flags, paddles and notice boards rather than by voice. Again, this was to make life on board more pleasant for the royals. In the main drawing room, the fire had to be electric too, so that a sailor wouldn't need to stand next to an open flame with a bucket all day long, as per Navy rules, in case it went out of control. The total cost of her construction was £2,098,000, and she was ready for sea trials by November 1953, which Philip attended. She was then formally commissioned on the 7th of January 1954. In the meantime, her crew had been selected and so were ready to carry out additional trials to learn how the ship handled and practice the manoeuvres they expected to have to make on her. Her first stint of duty carrying the royal family finally came on the 14th of April at Portsmouth. The Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh were finishing up a tour of the Commonwealth at the time, while their children, Prince Charles and Princess Anne, stayed at home with the Queen Mother and Princess Margaret. It was the little prince and princess who took the first royal voyage on the new yacht, having been dropped off there with their governess and other members of the royal household and left in their care and that of the ship's crew. Britannia then sailed to Malta, arriving 8 days later and picking up the Earl and Countess Mountbatten whilst there, then headed on to Libya where it collected the Queen and the Duke on the 30th of April. Then it was back to Malta where some additional furniture and royal luggage was collected before heading home to London via Gibraltar. She arrived and sailed up the Thames and beneath Tower Bridge on the 15th of May to a rapturous welcome. It had been a very good beginning to what would be a spectacular 44-year run for the new royal yacht. Before we get any further into Britannia's many voyages, however, let's stop and talk about what life was like on board for both royals and crew. Britannia was surely the smallest of the monarch's official residences, if we can call a boat an official residence, but, and I say this as someone who's visited quite a few of them, it's probably the one that gives you the best idea of what Queen Elizabeth was like behind closed doors and what she liked in a home, no doubt due to her aforementioned input into its design and decor. It's quite fancy to us mere mortals, but very simple by royal standards, and I'm sure lots of millionaires and billionaires out there have far more elaborate private yachts. The Queen and Prince Philip had their own bedrooms, each with a single bed and decorated according to their tastes. The Queen's was outfitted in light colours, with a bed, a desk and mirror, and bedside tables and lamps. Prince Philip's had a red colour scheme for the linens and darker wood for the furniture to give it a more masculine feel. Across the hall was another little suite for other members of the family, and here we find the only double bed on the ship, brought on board at the request of the then Prince Charles for his honeymoon with Princess Diana in 1981. There were also phones in the rooms so that an attendant could be called if a member of the family needed anything. Other, smaller bedrooms could be used as royal nurseries for the children. The state dining room was where much of the formal entertaining took place, and took an incredible 3 hours to set up properly for a state dinner, as everything had to be perfectly laid out. The menus could be taken home as mementos by those lucky enough to get an invite. Around the sides of the room are various souvenirs acquired by the royals on their many journeys, including a head from Easter Island gifted to the family in 1971. Britannia had its own band, which would play for the family during dinners, whilst during state visits they would also play the national anthem of the host country on the outer deck. The dining room could also be converted into an onboard cinema for the family, with the officers and some of the yachtsmen allowed to come in and watch the movies with them, and there was a dance floor under the carpet which was used during Princess Anne's 21st birthday party. Just beyond this room are the separate studies of Her Majesty and Prince Philip, one on either side of the hallway, and included so that the couple could continue to attend to their duties whilst on board, as unfortunately the Queen never really got a day off, bar Christmas, no matter where she was in the world. Again, the decor reflects their different tastes. Philip had a replica of one of the boats he had served in the Royal Navy over his desk, for instance, while Elizabeth had more flowery fabric on the chairs and pictures of her parents. There is in fact a really lovely selection of informal photographs of the royal family on display in these rooms as well as elsewhere on the ship. Moving down the hallway, you come to an anteroom with chairs which the family and their guests could spill out into if necessary from the adjoining drawing room, which looks very cosy with its squishy armchairs in flowery fabric, tables set up for games like backgammon, a piano that was played by the likes of Princesses Margaret and Diana, and of course the aforementioned electric fire. The only thing I don't recall seeing were the royal loos and baths or showers, but perhaps I missed them or they were omitted from the tour for the sake of royal modesty. Outside, the veranda deck could be used for games, lounging around, painting, Prince Philip liked to do that sometimes, or even water sports, as a little collapsible pool could be put out for the family's use. Just inside is a sunroom with wicker deck chairs purchased by Philip in Hong Kong in 1957 and a bar for those who didn't fancy getting splashed. Britannia carried some unusual cargo on deck as well. There was a spot on board for a Rolls-Royce and a Land Rover, for instance, which had to be hoisted on and off the ship so that they could be used during royal visits and holidays, or even taken on and off on special rafts. Nowadays, these are sitting on shore just next to the yacht, though I'm afraid they aren't the originals, and alongside them is a smaller boat known as the Royal Barge, which could ferry people to shore and back when it wasn't possible for Britannia to dock. You might also recognise it from the 2012 celebrations for Elizabeth's Diamond Jubilee, when it carried her and Prince Philip down the Thames as part of the Jubilee pageant, in the pouring rain, by the way. So much for the formal and informal royal quarters. Let's now turn to where the crew lived. And by the way, if you're wondering where I'm getting all my information about the ship, part of it comes from the fact that I'm creating this video just 3 days after I was actually on Britannia myself, and the rest is from an official history of the ship written by Richard Johnston Bryden, which I'll leave linked below for you. It's full of all the information you could want about the ship's adventures and lots of great anecdotes which I can't fit in here. As you might imagine, the crew's bedrooms were considerably less comfortable than the royals', and only the most senior amongst them would get his own room and even a bath. For the lower-ranked men, there were bunk beds in shared rooms, which could take up to 12 people at once. The slightly nicer ones have fewer bunks, more space to move around in, and even the odd TV, and little privacy curtains run alongside the beds. What I didn't see very often in crew quarters, though, were windows, and even the beds were, in some cases, only put in during a 1972-73 refit. Prior to that, many of the men were sleeping in hammocks. There were several recreational spaces too, kitted out with settees, TVs, books, little bar areas, and space to relax. And as the ship hadn't been built with enough accommodation for the royal band, some of its members had to sleep on camp beds in the unwinding room after the yachtsmen had gone to bed themselves, and it was apparently a bit smoky and bumpy. The officers also had a very nice dining room with signed photos from the royals and other memorabilia around the edges of the room. Both this and the little den next to it are decorated with furnishings sporting Tudor roses on them too, which I thought was a nice touch. In all of these recreational rooms, there are photos of the royal family and souvenirs either acquired during the ship's travels or brought over from other royal vessels of the past. Britannia was in fact something of a floating royal museum even before it was decommissioned and opened to the public. I may not have spotted the royal loos, but I did see the shared bathrooms and shower areas frequented by most of those on board, plus a laundry room to keep everyone's clothes, including the royals, in pristine condition, and a tiny meal room to receive word from home. The shop in the bowels of the ship was open to all too, and was sometimes frequented by the royal children when they were allowed to buy sweets, and let me tell you, if I'd had any room in my luggage, I would have bought some of the fudge they were selling, because I was allowed a little sliver of it as a sample, and it was very nice. Unfortunately, when you're only allowed a rucksack on the plane though, space is at a premium. The kitchens and storerooms to keep things like plates, glasses and cutlery are all downstairs, and of course, once you're out of the state and family apartments, the decor you see in the ship's corridors isn't quite as good, though everything is very neat, clean and functional. For those unlucky enough to fall ill or be injured, the ship has a medical bay which could take up to 3 patients at once, and this could also be used on the rare occasion when a distress call was received from another ship requesting medical assistance for one of their crew. Britannia responded to such a call in January 1963, for instance, whilst en route to Tahiti, changing course to take on board a man suffering serious burns from the SS Glenmore. Thankfully, he made a good recovery. Then there were the engine rooms, always kept absolutely gleaming, and there, of course, to keep the entire show on the road, or rather, the waves. This room was kept so immaculate that people were asked to wipe their feet on a mat before going into it rather than when coming out of it, an extremely unusual state of affairs on board a ship. Up on deck was the bridge from where everything was managed and courses plotted, and Britannia's original wheelhouse came from the 1893 sailing yacht of the same name that I've already mentioned, and which was raced by George V during Cowes Week, a sailing regatta held on the Isle of Wight after World War I. Let's not forget the decks and walkways around the entire ship either, which will have afforded some stunning views over the years as Britannia sailed the world. The ship was used for numerous royal tours and other activities over the years, starting from the year she was completed, for Prince Philip took her to Canada in 1954. Then, in 1955, Princess Margaret used it for a tour of the Caribbean, and in that same year it took the Queen and Philip to Norway. It would be tedious to go through all the voyages the Royal Yacht went on, which encompassed almost the entire world that's accessible by water. So let me just give you some statistics for what she accomplished between 1954 and December 1997. There were 85 state visits, 162 visits to non-Commonwealth countries by the Queen, and 90 to Commonwealth countries by Her Majesty, 133 visits to Commonwealth countries by other members of the royal family, and 226 to non-Commonwealth countries by them, 162 visits by the Queen within UK waters, and 110 such visits by other members of the family. In short, Britannia was very well used, and though I can't run through all of her activities here, allow me to tell you about some of her most notable trips and adventures. There was Prince Philip's World Tour of 1956 into 1957, which included opening the 1956 Summer Olympics in Melbourne and a trek to the Antarctic, as seen in the TV show The Crown, from where he made a live Christmas Day speech which directly followed the Queen's, and which was read out from Her Majesty's sitting room at 6:56 a.m. local time. I know this isn't very seasonally appropriate if you're not watching this in December, but as we're on the topic, you might also want to check out my video all about the history of the Royal Christmas broadcasts. I'll leave it linked for you. In 1959, he and Queen Elizabeth took Britannia to Canada, hosting President Eisenhower on board at one point during the trip. And in 1960, it took Princess Margaret and her husband, the Earl of Snowdon, to the Caribbean for their honeymoon. 4 years later, the Queen Mother used it for a convalescent cruise to recover from having her appendix removed, and in 1965, it was with the Queen and Prince Philip for an historic trip to Germany, the first time a British monarch had set foot there since 1913. There were also annual family cruises around the Western Isles of Scotland, where the royals could disembark for quiet picnics on deserted beaches, well away from the prying eyes of both press and public, and the honeymoon of Princess Anne and Captain Mark Phillips in 1973. It was involved in the celebrations for the Queen's Silver Jubilee in 1977, and in 1983, President Reagan and his wife Nancy even spent part of their 31st wedding anniversary on board, with the Queen throwing them a party and having them to stay overnight. Britannia wasn't just for parties, though. She could be and was a life-saving vessel on occasion, as the next story I have to share with you shows. One of the most famous jobs the Royal Yacht ever fulfilled was when it helped to evacuate refugees from Aden in South Yemen in January 1986, after civil war broke out there. Imagine for a minute what an incredible sight that must have been for those stuck on the beaches, exhausted and starving according to the reports from Britannia's crew and in fear of their lives, to see nothing less than the Queen's own yacht coming over the horizon with Union Jacks flying so that the refugees would recognise her. It must have been one of the best moments of their lives, and it was certainly great PR for the ship. Between the 17th and 23rd of January, Britannia rescued 1,082 people of 55 nationalities, plus one French dog, despite the fact that fighting broke out on the beaches at one point, with shells landing in the water between Britannia and the shore, and rebels who had to be bought off with supplies including cigarettes, chocolate and alcohol from the ship in order to get them to allow the refugees to leave. The feat was accomplished by using little boats called jolly boats to ferry them out to the ship, where they were given a blanket, registered at a temporary registration point set up in the veranda, then given hot soup and shown to their accommodation in the royal apartments. The dining room and drawing room had had their furniture removed to make space for the unexpected passengers, and if you're wondering why there were so many nationalities, it's because although Britannia was technically sent to collect British subjects, out of humanity, the crew took on board any refugees that they could. No one was rescued at the expense of anyone else, though, and at one point the ship turned back to pick up one London bus driver who had arrived on the beach half an hour after Britannia had left. He later told the press that it brought tears to his eyes to see Britannia return for him, saying, "The Queen's yacht turned back for me, just for me. I can't believe it." Guys, I have to tell you, even I welled up just reading that. How has there not been a Hollywood movie made about this episode yet? After all this drama, it was back to normal operations very quickly, and a few months later the yacht hosted the new Duke and Duchess of York on their honeymoon. This was the last honeymoon cruise it would provide, by the way. Then there was an historic state visit to China that September, which marked the first time a reigning British monarch had gone there and was a sign of improving relations between the two countries. Other notable events, duties and voyages included the time Britannia got frozen in its berth on the Hudson River in New York in February 1994. There was even a snowman built on the veranda deck. Her involvement in the commemorations for D-Day later that year, followed by an historic state visit to post-Soviet Russia, the first time a British monarch had been there since before the murder of the Russian royals to whom the Queen and Prince Philip were related in 1918. There was also another to South Africa in 1995, and both were of enormous political importance at the time. The trip to South Africa was known even then to be the last state visit Britannia would make, however, as she was now reaching the end of her life as a commissioned yacht. The Queen and Prince Philip had actually offered to give up the ship in 1968, when the country was facing economic hardship, as a show of unity with the British people. However, this offer was not taken up, though other jobs were found for Britannia over the years so that she could be useful in between royal trips and therefore be even better value for money. She was used in Royal Navy exercises, for instance. Despite her range of uses, however, by the mid-1990s there was serious talk of decommissioning the now more than 40-year-old ship, given her age and the cost of maintaining her. There were plans, though, to replace her with a new boat, for the Royal Yacht had proven over its lifetime to be very popular with the people of both the UK and the many countries it went to visit. Huge numbers came out to see it on its travels, and it was considered an honour to be invited on board to stay with or even just dine with the Queen and Prince Philip. It allowed them to flatter the dignitaries they visited in other countries and bring a little of the glamour and prestige of a royal residence to them, for after all, you can't cart Buckingham Palace or Windsor Castle around the world with you. As such, it was invaluable in promoting the so-called soft power of the monarchy. It also provided accommodation and an office space for their support staff to work from during royal trips, instead of having to find them hotel accommodation everywhere they went. This was an added convenience, and when you go to Britannia today, these offices are preserved as they were at the time of decommissioning, complete with mid-1990s computers which look like dinosaurs of the digital age now. As well as the aforementioned naval exercises, the government even used it to host industry and trade leaders to help drum up investment in the United Kingdom, with several British politicians commenting on the fact that they could get people to come to such events, known as sea days, who would never accept an invitation if it was being held in a hotel or conference centre. Britannia was iconic in the way that something like Air Force One was and is today. Sadly, though, it had sailed its course. In January 1997, it was announced that she would be decommissioned by the end of the year, and although several plans for a new, supposedly cheaper-to-run yacht had been drawn up, ultimately the idea was dropped in October by the new Labour government which had come into power in May. Britannia's last official overseas duty was to take Prince Charles to Hong Kong to be present at the handing over of this former British colony to the Chinese on the 1st of July. It then brought the Prince and the last governor of Hong Kong and his family to Manila, from where they could fly back to the UK. There was one last family cruise around the Western Isles in August, then a farewell tour around the United Kingdom beginning in October and lasting until December, when it was finally time to say goodbye. On the morning of the 11th, Queen Elizabeth II boarded her ship for the last time, or at least the last time while it was still hers, to say farewell to it and to its crew. She was pipped off again at 3:01 p.m. to watch the decommissioning ceremony, and if you look closely, you'll notice that the clocks on Britannia have remained frozen at that time almost ever since. It was the end of an era, and Elizabeth was seen to shed a tear at the decommissioning ceremony for the ship which held so many memories for her, and which she had said was the only place she could really be herself. Britannia had sailed 1,087,623 miles since 1954, and although there had been plans to scrap her rather than let her languish and deteriorate somewhere, it was decided to turn her into a floating museum, and she was sent to Leith in Edinburgh for that purpose, where you can visit her today, though she's only accessible via a shopping centre, which has always seemed quite odd to me. She is one of Scotland's most popular attractions, and rightly so. If you get the chance to visit her, it's well worth your time in my opinion. She was renovated and new entrances installed in the hull so that visitors could come aboard her more easily, and glass panels were put into the walls of rooms like the royal bedrooms and studies so that visitors can look in without walking through the rooms. The royal family also allowed enough of their belongings to remain on board so that tourists can get a real sense of what the ship was like when they used it. She was open to the public in October 1998 and also made available for hire for private events. This latter function has ensured that the royals have been back on board since her decommissioning. For example, Queen Elizabeth's granddaughter, Zara Phillips, and her soon-to-be husband, Mike Tyndall, hosted a pre-wedding party on board her the day before their marriage, which took place in Edinburgh in 2011. I hope you enjoyed that history of and behind-the-scenes look at Britannia. Please consider giving the video a thumbs up, as that really helps YouTube and myself to know that you liked it. And if you haven't already done so, please do subscribe and switch on the notification bell to get more from me. I'd love to have you stick around. For more from History Calling, you can also become a YouTube member or join me on Patreon, where I share bonus material such as early access to ad-free videos and bonus podcasts about history and also life as a YouTuber. The link is below for you, as are links to my book, Find Your Irish Ancestors Online, available from Amazon, and my website, historycallingofficial.com, where you can get 2 complimentary downloads if you sign up to my free mailing list. Let me know below if you think the King should get another royal yacht to replace Britannia. And if you enjoyed this video, you're definitely going to want to check out my episode on what I think is the most famous British royal residence of them all, Buckingham Palace. I hope you enjoy it, and until next time, keep learning.